The whispering shadows of Eldergrove. The cold autumn wind clung to the ancient stones of Eldergrove like a persistent shadow, bending the skeletal branches of the gnarled oaks along the narrow cobblestone streets. The village, shrouded in mist, lay cradled at the edge of the endless forest, where sunlight dared not linger past midday. Smoke from crooked chimneys curled lazily toward the grey sky, carrying with it the faint, acrid tang of burning peat and damp earth. Every footstep on the cobblestones echoed like a muted drumbeat, a lonely rhythm in the silence of an otherwise empty evening. Elric, a boy of 17 summers, hurried through the mist, his cloak pulled tightly around him, ears straining for the faintest hint of sound. The villagers had been whispering for weeks about strange occurrences, the disappearance of children, shadows that moved against the wind, voices that spoke from the darkness. Some claimed the forest itself had awoken, a dark spirit angered by the encroachment of man upon its realm. Others muttered of curses laid centuries ago by an old sorceress whose name had been lost to time, but whose wrath lingered. Elric's best friend, Tomas, had vanished 3 nights past. He had gone to fetch water from the old well beyond the northern ridge and never returned. The village search parties had scoured the forest at dawn, their torches flickering in the fog, but no trace had been found, except, perhaps, for the faint sound of whispering, like the breath of dry leaves over stone. Tonight, Elric decided, he would not wait for someone else to confront the darkness. The forest loomed before him, black and silent, a mass of twisted roots and bramble. Each step into its shadowed heart felt like stepping into another world. The chill seeped through his boots and gloves, and every rustle of leaf or snap of twig made his pulse quicken. Yet he pressed on, guided by the dim light of the crescent moon and the faint, almost imperceptible trail of footprints that Tomas might have left behind. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time seemed suspended under the oppressive canopy. Somewhere deep within the woods, a low murmur began, soft and indistinct, like voices carried on the wind. Elric's breath hitched as he realized it was speaking his name. Elric, Elric. The whisper rose and fell, faint as a sigh, yet unmistakable. He followed it, though every instinct screamed to flee. Soon he came to a clearing, where the ruins of an old stone chapel rose from the earth like the bones of some long-forgotten giant. Its walls were crumbling, the roof gaping like a silent scream, and the moonlight spilled across the shattered pews, casting long, jagged shadows. In the center of the chapel, a figure knelt, a boy, or perhaps the spirit of a boy, with matted hair and eyes wide with terror. Tomas. Elric, the boy whispered. His voice trembled, and a strange frost clung to his breath, though the air was not cold enough. You should not have come. They are here. Elric stepped closer, heart hammering. Who's here? What has happened, Tomas? The boy's gaze darted to the shadows around them. From the corners of the ruined chapel, the darkness seemed to pulse, thickening as if it had substance, as if it were alive. And then the whispers began again, countless voices murmuring in a language Elric could not understand, a chorus of dread that rose and fell like waves. "They hunger for the living," Tomas said, his voice barely audible. "The shadows, they are the forgotten, the cursed. They linger here in this place, bound by hatred and sorrow, and they have chosen you." A chill ran down Elric's spine as he peered into the darkness. Shapes moved, subtle at first, a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision, but then more pronounced, more deliberate. Figures rose from the floor and walls, their forms indistinct, shifting like smoke. Eyes glowed faintly, and the whispers turned to hissing. "Run," Tomas urged. "Run, before they reach you." But Elric did not move. Something compelled him forward, a strange mixture of fear and resolve. He knew the villagers would not save him, and he could not abandon his friend. He drew a small dagger from his belt, its steel catching the moonlight, and stepped into the blackness. The shadows surged toward him, a tide of living darkness, and Elric felt their cold seep into his bones. He swung the dagger, but it passed through them like mist. Panic rose, but he forced it down, grounding himself. Then he remembered the tales his grandmother had told him, of an ancient bell buried beneath the chapel, whose ringing could banish spirits. "Tomas, where is it?" he shouted, his voice echoing unnaturally. The boy pointed toward a pile of rubble near the altar. "Beneath the stones! Hurry!" Elric dove toward the pile, lifting stones with trembling hands, until he unearthed a small iron bell corroded with age. He grasped it tightly and began to ring. One clear, resonant peal rang out, and for a moment the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. The shadows recoiled, hissing and twisting, writhing like serpents in the light of the moon. Again he rang the bell, faster this time, until the air vibrated with its tone. The whispers grew frantic, desperate, as if the spirits themselves were screaming in fear. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the noise ceased. Silence fell, thick and absolute. Tomas collapsed, trembling, the frost melting from his skin. You've done it," he whispered. "For now, they are held back." Elric sank to his knees, exhausted, the bell slipping from his fingers. The moonlight bathed the chapel in silver, and for the first time that night, the forest seemed still. Yet he knew, deep down, that this reprieve was temporary. The shadows of Eldergrove did not rest. They waited, patient and eternal, for the next unwary soul to wander too far into their domain. Together, the boys stumbled out of the ruins, the forest seemingly less oppressive, though still whispering faintly in the corners of their ears. The village lay ahead, dimly lit by lanterns, the familiar smell of smoke and wet earth greeting them like an old friend. "Elric, will it ever end?" Tomas asked, voice trembling. Elric shook his head. "No," he admitted softly. "Not truly. But tonight we survived, and that is enough." But the forest had not finished with them. Shadows moved in the corners of the village, thin and fleeting, barely noticeable but undeniably present. Windows that were closed seemed to darken unnaturally, the air inside heavy, thick with whispers. Villagers slept uneasily, dreaming of cold hands, of eyes in the darkness, of things moving beneath the floorboards. Elric could not sleep. He sat by his window, watching the moonlight crawl across the misted streets. He heard the whispers again, soft, almost friendly, but tinged with hunger. Somewhere deep in Eldergrove, something stirred, something ancient, waiting for the night to return fully. Days passed, and the forest seemed quieter, as though the shadows were resting. Yet at night, faint figures would glide past the lantern light, leaving only the echo of cold breath. The village elders muttered prayers over their hearths, and mothers drew blankets tighter around their children. And Elric, standing by the chapel each evening, knew that what he had seen was only a fragment of the darkness that lingered beyond the trees. Weeks later, a traveler arrived at Eldergrove, lost in the fog, speaking of roads that twisted unnaturally, of voices calling his name from nowhere. The villagers led him to the chapel, warning him not to linger near the forest. Yet, as he stepped into the clearing, the shadows stirred once more, whispering his name, beckoning him. Elric watched silently, heart heavy. He understood now that Eldergrove's curse was eternal, woven into the very soil, the stones, the roots of the trees. Some would escape, some would not, and the whispers would continue, calling each soul who dared wander too far. That night, as the moon rose high and silver light spilled across the village, Elric heard the faintest voice, Tomas's voice, far away, carried by the wind. "Be vigilant. The shadows never rest." And so it was in Eldergrove, a village at the edge of the world, where darkness breathed, where whispers carried secrets too terrible to speak, and where the brave or the foolish would always hear the call of the shadows in the night.